So why is a white paper potentially so important? 9 minutes after 7. Richard Corbett is Labour MEP for Yorkshire and Humber and Labour's Deputy Leader in the European Parliament. Why are you calling for a white paper, Mr Corbett? Good morning.
Because I think the government needs to set out the options for it and what it can choose in this context, and it should cost them. It should say how much each of those options would cost us as a country. Because we, before we start negotiating, need to decide what we want in a number of crucial areas.
Makes it rather difficult for her in her subsequent negotiations if the other side know precisely what she has or has not got in her armoury, doesn't it?
Not at all, because she's going to have to tell the other side what we want. You can't start a negotiation without putting your demands on the table, and we need to choose what our demands are.
I don't know if you ever. I hope you haven't, but I don't know if you've ever. I don't know if you've ever experienced a divorce, Mr. Corbett. But I can absolutely assure you, when you do, you don't go in first with your final offer.
No, who said you should go in first with your final offer?
Well, you want Parliament to lay out what she can and cannot do. Well, what leeway would that give her when she sits down with the EU?
Well, look, let me give an example so that it's clear. Something that's not been discussed very much yet. Leaving the EU means normally leaving all of its agencies. Take the European Civil Aviation Agency. That body tests all aircraft in Europe for their safety. We do that jointly to save money, and gives a certificate allowing them to fly anywhere in Europe if they're considered safe. If we leave that, we have to set up our own agency at great cost doing the same thing. Or we think, oh, that's a bit costly. Let's follow the European agency's rulings anyway, even though we're not part of it. That's not very satisfactory if we're not part of it. Or we can say, could we stay in the European Civil Aviation Agency, although we're leaving the EU? We have to choose what our preferred option is and put that on the table. Now, we might not get our preferred option. We can fall back then on another one, maybe. But when you go into the negotiation, you've got to say, this is what we want. And you can say the same for the Medicines Agency, which does a similar thing for all new pharmaceutical products.
It's a wonder how we ever survived before Europe, isn't it? It's a wonder the planes didn't fall out of the sky.
Well, this was a practical matter of testing aircraft. There are a heck of a lot more of them now than there were when we joined, jointly to save money and to fly across Europe, after all, a lot of them.
Stay on the line if you were. James Cleverly is Conservative MP for Braintree. This is the case for a white paper. Are you persuaded, Mr. Cleverly? Good morning.
Not really. Good morning, Nick. Sorry. No, not particularly. I think the example that we've just heard is exactly why, if a white paper were to be useful in its traditional sense, it would need to go into a lot of detail so that people could discuss the various clauses of a bill and that kind of stuff. That's what a white paper is there to do. If we went into that level of detail in the white paper, then we would, by default, be giving away a whole load of negotiating positions before we've even got to the negotiating table, which would be of massive disbenefit to the British people. So for the white paper to be useful, it would actually be counterproductive. And if we kept it vague enough so that we had room to manoeuvre in the negotiations, it wouldn't work as a white paper. So either way, it's a nice idea, but it's just not going to work.
Surely, though, that we have the right to know some of the broad parameter of where the government wants to take us, don't we?
Well, we just had a speech where the Prime Minister put forward exactly the broad parameters. She said that one of the very clear messages that we got from the referendum result is that people wanted border control back in the hands of the British government. We know that we cannot do that whilst we remain a member of a single market, so we, by default, are going to leave the single market. We also know that it is in our national interest to sign international trade deals, and we know we cannot do that without leaving the customs union. So we know the broad parameters of the speech. Now, we can put that in a white paper if people really, really want. I'm not sure how that's going to add value.
Well, let's ask Richard Corbett. What about someone takes that 6,400-word speech from the Prime Minister last week, adds a bit in, and then you've got your white paper? How would that be?
Well, they could do it by taking that speech and spelling out all the things that she left rather vague and didn't spell out at all. Like the question of agencies that I mentioned just now, that's not mentioned in her speech. Also, that choice of leaving the single market because allegedly we can't control our borders. That's a load of nonsense, by the way.
What you think we can control our borders?
Yes, we can control our borders.
Why aren't we
check
then?
People when they come into Britain.
Why aren't we controlling them?
Across the border recently, you can't enter Britain without being checked at the border.
No. But why do we seem unable then to limit immigration to the tens of thousands as a former Prime Minister promised?
Well, good question, because...
Well, you're the one who said we can control it, Mr. Corbett. I would suggest...
to Britain, it's from outside the European Union, entirely under British rules, nothing to do with Brussels whatsoever, and Theresa May, as Home Secretary, fails to cut those numbers, despite having herself set a target of doing so. So that might be a good starting point to ask.
You don't sense you're a little bit out of touch with the will of the people here, do you, perhaps, Mr. Corbett?
No, not at all, because people...
Why do you suppose they voted? Why do you suppose a lot of people voted Brexit last June?
If you let me answer, many people voted for Brexit at any cost. That's fine, that's their view. But a lot of people voted for Brexit at no cost, because that's what they were told. They were told it would save us money and it would go to the NHS. If it's now turning out to be a rather costly exercise, contrary to what we were told, and if it really is going to be a bigger economic problem and disaster for this country, then those people are entitled to say, hang on a minute.
You want another referendum, don't you?
That's not what I voted for.
Lassie, you want another referendum, don't you, Mr. Corbett?
If it turns out to be the case that Brexit is going to be far more costly and damaging to Britain than we were told, then people will be demanding the right to reconsider.
Lastly, thank you. Lastly, Mr. Cleverly, do you ever see the possibility of another referendum? I don't think I've got the strength, by the way, but do you?
Look, we've just seen why Labour are all over the place on this. Mr. Corbett's position is so illogical, it defies belief. If you were negotiating, bear in mind the EU don't want us to leave. If you were negotiating with the British and you knew that at the end of the process your negotiated position was going to be validated by a second referendum, why would you give anything away in the negotiation? You would make the negotiation outcome as unpalatable as possible, hoping that then the British people go, that deal is appalling, we're not going to leave the EU. And that's why the Prime Minister said that if we don't get a good deal, then we will walk away from the process, go on to World Trade Organization rules, where, by the way, which is the rules that we trade with America, our second largest trading partner, with whom we have a trade surplus. There is nothing scary about the WTO, and we will walk away from the table.
My thanks to Richard Corbett, Labour MEP for Yorkshire and Humber, Labour's Deputy Leader in the European Parliament, and James Cleverly, the latter of the two there, Conservative MP for Braintree.